My mother disowned me because I married a widowed firefighter with a 5-year-old daughter she called someone else's baggage. 9 years later, the morning after his company was acquired for $41 million, she showed up on my porch with a beige suitcase and a handwritten list of what the family needed from us. She had not called on my wedding day. She had not called when I gave birth to our son. She had mailed back every Christmas card, every school picture, and one handmade Mother's Day card my stepdaughter had spent an hour decorating with purple glitter. But there she was in Charlotte, North Carolina, standing beneath the porch light as if 9 years of silence were a scheduling conflict. Before she said she missed me, her eyes moved past my shoulder toward the hardwood floors, the staircase, and the framed photographs on the wall. Before she asked about my children, she asked whether the acquisition money had already cleared. And before I offered her a chair, she said, "You have done very well, Lauren. It is time to remember where you came from." I looked at the suitcase in one hand, the folded list in the other, and realized my mother had not come to rebuild a relationship. She had come to collect from one. My name is Lauren Parker. I was 35 when this happened, and for most of my life I believed my mother's approval was a prize I could earn if I made enough correct choices in a row. My parents, Deborah and Martin Caldwell, lived in Lexington, Kentucky. In a brick colonial with white shutters and a circular driveway my mother treated like a public statement. Deborah sold high-end residential real estate and could tell the difference between old money and borrowed money from the way someone landscaped a front walk. My father managed purchasing for a manufacturing plant and survived our household by becoming very good at disappearing into the garage whenever Deborah's mood changed. My younger sister, Allison, learned a different strategy. She became whatever version of herself Mom rewarded. Cheerleader when Mom wanted school spirit. Sorority girl when Mom wanted social proof. Event stylist when Mom decided entrepreneurship sounded impressive at brunch. I was the child who asked why. Why did Allison get a new car after failing 2 classes while I drove our grandmother's old Buick through college? Why did Mom call Allison sensitive when she cried, but call me difficult when I disagreed? Why did every family emergency somehow arrive with my name attached to the solution? Dad usually gave the same answer. Your mother worries because she loves hard. I believed him until I was old enough to understand that love does not always deserve credit for what control is doing. I met Ethan Morales when I was 24. I was a financial analyst for a regional hospital network in Knoxville, Tennessee, and he was a firefighter who came through our office during a city safety inspection after a renovation. He had soot on one sleeve, a chipped front tooth from a high school hockey accident, and the calmest voice I had ever heard. We spoke for 3 minutes that day. A month later, I saw him again at a community fundraiser. He remembered my name, asked what I thought of the hospital expansion, and listened long enough for me to realize he was not waiting for his turn to talk. Ethan was 36 years older than me, and already a father. His wife had died in a car accident when their daughter, Sophie, was 3. By the time I met him, Sophie was 5, cautious around strangers and obsessed with dinosaurs. Deborah hated the situation before she ever met either of them. "A widower with a child?" she said when I told her. "Lauren, you are 24. You do not start your life by cleaning up someone else's." I told her Sophie was not something to clean up. Mom replied, "You know what I mean." I did. That was the problem. She met Ethan once at Thanksgiving. He arrived with flowers, helped Dad carry extra chairs from the basement, and spent 20 minutes on the floor building a wooden train with my cousin's toddler because the child would not stop following him. Mom barely spoke to him. Later, while we loaded dishes, she said, "He seems decent." Decent is not the same thing as suitable. Suitable for what? I asked. For this family. Ethan heard enough from the hallway to understand. On the drive back to Knoxville, he told me I did not have to defend him to people committed to misunderstanding him. That sentence made me love him more. A year later, he proposed at our kitchen table after Sophie had gone to bed. No restaurant, no photographer hiding behind flowers. He set down a ring, took my hand, and said, "I cannot promise easy, but I can promise you will never have to guess whether you are wanted here." I said yes before he finished the sentence. When I called Mom, she went silent for so long I thought the connection had dropped. Then she said, "If you marry him, do not expect me to pretend this is the life I raised you for." Dad was on another extension. I could hear him breathing. I waited for him to say something. He did not. 2 days later, a letter arrived on Cream Stationery. Deborah wrote about family standards, reputation, sacrifice, and the future I was throwing away. She said I would spend my best years raising another woman's child, while Ethan remained tied to a tragedy that would always come before me. The final sentence said, "If you choose this, do not come back expecting us to celebrate it." I read it at our tiny apartment table, while Sophie colored beside me. She looked up and asked why I was crying. I told her grown-ups sometimes say hurtful things when they are scared. She slid her purple crayon across the table and said, "You can use mine." I kept the letter. At the time, I thought I kept it because throwing it away would make the rejection too permanent. Later, it became the first page in a box of things I needed, so I would never let anyone convince me the past had happened differently. Ethan asked whether I wanted to delay the wedding. "Not because of them," he said, "because I do not want you waking up in 10 years wondering whether you chose too quickly just to prove something." I told him I was not marrying him to prove anything. I was marrying the person who had just offered me a way out if I needed it. We married in a small botanical garden outside Knoxville with 42 guests. Sophie wore a pale yellow dress and carried a basket she kept forgetting to use because she was too excited. Ethan's mother, Carmen, drove from Nashville with enough food to feed twice the guest list even though we had a caterer. My parents did not come. Allison texted the morning of the wedding. "Mom is devastated. Please stop pretending this is not hurting the family." I turned off my phone. The ceremony was simple. Afterward, Sophie asked whether she was allowed to call me Mom if she wanted. I cried harder at that question than I had at my vows. I told her she could call me Lauren forever if that felt right, and Mom someday if it did. She waited 6 months. Then one morning while I packed her lunch, she said, "Mom, where are my crackers?" Like the word had always belonged there. Deborah never knew about that morning. She did not call. Dad did not call. Allison posted wedding photos from a cousin's ceremony 6 weeks later with the caption, "Nothing like celebrating family the right way." That was the beginning of 9 years of silence. At first, I fought it. I mailed Mom a wedding photograph, with a note saying we were happy and that the door remained open if she wanted to know us. It came back unopened. I sent Dad a birthday card. Returned. I mailed a Christmas box with cookies Sophie decorated, 2 photographs, and a scarf I knew Mom would like. The package came back with "Return to Sender" written across the top in thick marker. Sophie saw it by the door and asked why Grandma Deborah did not want her cookies. I lied and said the address label had been damaged. That night I started keeping everything. The cream letter, returned cards, screenshots of unanswered messages, social media posts where my mother talked about having 2 beautiful daughters, even though every photograph showed only Allison. A message from Allison telling a cousin I had chosen strangers over blood. I put it all in a gray storage box in the back of my closet. Ethan never called it unhealthy. Once he asked whether keeping the records helped. I said, "It helps me remember I am not crazy." He nodded. "Then keep them." Carmen became the mother figure I had not expected. She never tried to replace Deborah. She simply showed up. When Sophie had a school performance, Carmen drove 2 hours. When Ethan worked 24-hour shifts, she called to check whether I needed groceries. When I got the flu, she left soup on our porch and texted, "No need to answer. Rest." Love without surveillance felt unfamiliar. I kept waiting for a bill, a guilt trip, or an emotional invoice. None came. That was how I began learning the difference between being loved and being managed. Our life grew in unglamorous steps. After a warehouse collapse injured Ethan's shoulder, he left active firefighting and started a small fire safety inspection company with 2 former firefighters and 1 used van. I helped with budgets at night. Our dining table became an office after Sophie finished homework. The business grew because Ethan understood the work and I understood the numbers. We eventually built simple scheduling software that other contractors wanted to license. 3 years into our marriage, I became pregnant. I emailed mom. No answer. The ultrasound photo came back in a larger envelope with Dad's handwriting on the return address. Our son Caleb was born the following spring. Sophie treated becoming a big sister like a promotion. We mailed birth announcements to Kentucky. Deborah's returned. Dad's returned. Allison's did not, which gave me hope until a cousin quietly told me she had thrown it away after showing mom. By then, I understood the silence was not temporary anger. It was a system. Mom decided who existed inside the family story. Dad kept peace by obeying, and Allison protected her favored position by agreeing. I stopped mailing invitations after Sophie sent Deborah one for her middle school graduation, and it came back unopened. Sophie asked whether Grandma disliked her because she was not really mine. I told her, "You are my daughter, because we chose each other every day after we met. Nobody gets to reduce that." That returned invitation became the last item in the box for several years. Allison's life looked far more successful online than it was privately. She opened an event design studio with mom and dad's help, borrowed from them repeatedly, divorced, and became engaged again. Mom treated the second wedding like a chance to restore the family brand. We were not invited. A cousin privately sent me the guest list after Deborah told relatives that I had refused to attend. She also sent a family chat screenshot where Mom wrote, "Lauren made her choice years ago. We are not letting old drama overshadow Allison's day." Allison added, "Please do not bring this up around Mom. She has suffered enough." We spent that weekend in Asheville instead. Sophie was 17 by then, Caleb 8. We hiked, ate burgers, and ignored the wedding until photographs appeared that night. Dad gave a toast about family loyalty. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Sophie leaned over my shoulder and said, "Those centerpieces look like funeral flowers." I laughed hard enough to put the phone down. The hurt remained, but it no longer owned the evening. Our company's biggest growth came the following year. A national facilities management group offered to acquire the software division while keeping Ethan and me involved for several years. The deal was significant enough to become local business news. $41 million sounded enormous, and it was. But it was not a suitcase of cash arriving at our door. Employees owned shares, taxes existed. Much of the value remained tied to performance. What mattered was that after years of risking our savings, we finally had security. We paid off our modest mortgage, funded the children's education accounts, helped Carmen replace her aging roof, and gave bonuses to the first employees who had stayed through the ugly years. We did not post the purchase price. Someone else did. Within 24 hours, people in Kentucky who had ignored our family for almost a decade suddenly knew exactly where we lived. My LinkedIn profile showed visitors from Lexington. An old high school acquaintance messaged, "Your mom must be so proud." I stared at the sentence long enough to realize she probably had no idea. Then the first text arrived from Allison. "Hey, stranger. Huge news. Proud of you guys. Life is too short for old hurt. Would love to reconnect before the holidays." No apology. No mention of the wedding exclusion, no question about Sophie or Caleb. 3 minutes later, Dad called. I let it go to voicemail. His message said, "Your mother has been thinking a lot. Maybe this blessing is a sign the family should come back together." The money had become a religious event. I saved the voicemail. The next morning, Deborah texted for the first time in 9 years. "Lauren, I am ready to put the past behind us. There are important family matters we should discuss face to face." I showed Ethan. He read it twice. "Important family matters? She wants money." "You do not know that." "I do." He did not argue. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing yet." That afternoon, Melanie sent me screenshots from another family chat. Mom had written, "Lauren is practical. Emotion will make her defensive. We need to show her exactly what needs solving." Allison replied with a list. Dad's remaining mortgage, Mom's dental work, studio debt, Allison and Carter's wedding balance, a college account for Allison's daughter from her first marriage, and monthly help so Deborah and Martin could retire with dignity. Dad wrote, "Maybe we should apologize first." Mom answered, "Apologies can come later. Once she sees we are serious about rebuilding, she will understand helping is part of that." I printed the screenshots. For the first time, the storage box did not make me feel like a wounded daughter. It made me feel prepared. Mom arrived the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. She did not ask whether she could stay. She simply appeared at 10 in the morning with a rolling beige suitcase, a pressed blue blouse, and a folded sheet of paper tucked beneath her purse strap. I saw her through the front door camera and almost did not recognize her. She was 70 now. Her hair was shorter, her shoulders narrower, but the posture was exactly the same. Chin lifted slightly, expression prepared for judgment. Ethan was at the office. Sophie was home from her first semester at UNC Charlotte, asleep upstairs after a late study session. Caleb was at school. For a moment, I considered leaving Mom on the porch. Then I remembered 9 years of imagining what I would say if she ever returned. I opened the door. She looked at me, then immediately past me. Her eyes moved over the foyer, the staircase, the photographs, the wide kitchen beyond, measuring. "You look well," she said. "So do you." She lifted the suitcase handle. "I thought I might stay through Thanksgiving. It seems silly for family to spend another holiday apart." I did not move. "You did not ask." Her mouth tightened. "I assumed we were beyond formalities. We have not spoken in 9 years. Exactly. At some point someone has to be mature." There it was. The first insult had taken less than a minute. I stepped outside and pulled the door mostly closed behind me. "What do you actually want, Mom?" She looked offended. "I came to repair our family." "Then why did you bring a list?" Her eyes flicked toward the folded paper. She recovered quickly. "There are practical matters. Reconciliation is not only emotional, Lauren. Families take care of each other." "Which family?" "Do not be childish." "The family that returned my wedding photo? The family that sent back Sophie's graduation invitation? The family that told everyone I refused Allison's wedding after not inviting me?" Her face hardened. "We all made mistakes. Name one of yours." Silence. She stared at me as if the question were disrespectful. I waited. "I should not have let things go this long," she said finally. "That is not the same as saying what you did. I am standing on your porch trying, and you are interrogating me. You drove 7 hours with a financial list." She lowered her voice. "Your father's health is not good. Allison's business had a terrible year. Madison starts college in 2 years. We are not asking for anything that would affect your lifestyle. Madison was Allison's daughter. I had never met her. You do not know my lifestyle." "I know enough." She glanced at the house again. That movement told me everything. "Go home, Mom." Her face changed from offended to furious. "You would send your mother away before Thanksgiving?" "Yes. People know I came here." There it was again. Audience first. "Then tell them I was not ready." She grabbed the suitcase handle. "I told your father this would happen. Money has made you arrogant." I almost smiled. "You disowned me when I had none." She had no answer. She turned toward the driveway, then stopped when the front door opened behind me. Sophie stepped onto the porch barefoot, wearing sweatpants and one of Ethan's old fire department shirts. She looked at Deborah calmly. "Are you Grandma Deborah?" Mom stared at the young woman she had once called baggage. "Sophie. That is my name. You have grown. That happens in 9 years." I closed my eyes briefly. Sophie had inherited Ethan's calm and my inability to leave a bad sentence alone. Deborah said, "I always hoped we would meet properly." Sophie looked at me, then back at her. "I mailed you a graduation invitation." Mom's lips parted. "Your mother and I were having difficulties. I was 12. The porch went silent. Sophie continued, not cruelly, which somehow made it sharper. "You did not have difficulties with me. You just decided I counted as part of the punishment." Deborah's eyes filled with tears. "That is not fair." Sophie nodded. "Probably not. But it is what happened." She went back inside. Mom stood motionless. For the first time, the person she had reduced to an inconvenience had spoken back as an adult. You taught her to hate me, she whispered. No. I spent years explaining that your choices were about you, not her. She learned the rest from returned mail. Mom left. I assumed Thanksgiving would be quiet after that. I was wrong. Dad called the next morning. He apologized for the surprise visit and asked whether he could come to Thanksgiving alone. His voice sounded exhausted. I need to tell you some things before I lose the nerve again. I wanted to say no. Ethan said, you can say no and still be a good person. You can also say yes and set a time limit. We invited Dad from 2 until 5. Mom was not invited. Allison was not invited. Thanksgiving at our house was usually simple. Carmen brought sweet potatoes, Ethan smoked the turkey, Sophie made macaroni and cheese, and Caleb decorated place cards nobody needed. Dad arrived at 2 carrying no suitcase and no gifts. Just a pie from a grocery store and the nervous expression of a man entering a room where every silence he had chosen was waiting for him. He hugged me only after asking. He met Caleb for the first time. My 8-year-old son shook his hand and asked, Are you Mom's dad who lives in Kentucky? Dad's eyes filled. Yes. Caleb nodded. Cool. Grandpa Carmen's husband died, so I only have one grandpa right now. Nobody corrected the child's math. Dad sat beside Sophie during dinner. She was polite but distant. Halfway through the meal, he put down his fork. I owe everyone here an apology. Ethan said nothing. Carmen watched him steadily. Dad looked at me. Your mother did not make me return every envelope. Sometimes she told me to. Sometimes I did it before she asked because I knew what she wanted. That matters. I have spent years saying I was keeping peace. I was choosing the easiest person to disappoint. My throat tightened. Me. Yes. He turned toward Sophie. And you. I opened your graduation invitation. Sophie looked up. I knew someone did. I kept the picture for 3 days in my desk at work. Then I put it back in the envelope because Deborah found out. Why? Sophie asked. Dad swallowed. Because I was afraid of a fight at home. Sophie said. I was afraid you did not want me. Dad covered his eyes for a second. I am sorry. There was no defense after it. No mention of Mom being difficult. No request for instant forgiveness. That was the first apology in the Caldwell family I had ever trusted. Then the doorbell rang. I knew before checking the camera. Deborah stood outside with Allison, Carter, and a teenage girl I recognized from social media as Madison. Behind them were 2 cars full of relatives, who had apparently been told this was a family reunion. Mom had taken my boundary and turned it into an event. Ethan looked at me. Your call. I surprised myself. Let them in. Not because I wanted reconciliation, because I was tired of my mother using private cruelty and public innocence. If she wanted an audience, this time the audience would hear the whole sentence. They entered carrying casseroles, flowers, and the anxious energy of people who had been promised a heartwarming ending. Deborah kissed the air beside my cheek as though the porch conversation had never happened. Allison hugged me immediately. This is so overdue. I did not hug back. Madison looked uncomfortable. I felt sorry for her. She was a child brought into adults' unfinished business. We added chairs. Nobody ate much. After 10 minutes of forced conversation, Mom stood beside the fireplace and tapped her glass with a spoon. Since we are all finally together, I think gratitude is appropriate. I almost laughed. She spoke about second chances, blessings, humility, and the responsibility successful family members had to remember those who supported them before success. Ethan's hand found mine under the table. Deborah looked directly at me. Lauren and Ethan have been blessed beyond what most people can imagine, and I know in her heart Lauren understands that family resources should strengthen the entire family. Allison reached into her purse and placed the folded list on the table. Same handwriting. Same bullet points. Dad's mortgage balance. Medical expenses, Allison's studio debt, Madison's college fund, $24,000 still owed from Allison and Carter's wedding. A monthly parent support amount. At the bottom was a total for the first year. $286,000. Allison smiled nervously. It sounds huge altogether, but for you guys it is not really huge anymore. Sophie actually laughed. Not cruel laughter, disbelief. You have never met us, she said. Allison frowned. Excuse me? You have never met Caleb. You met me once when I was 5. Grandma mailed my invitation back. But you made a spreadsheet for our money. Deborah snapped. This is an adult conversation. Sophie stood. I am 20 now. Mom looked at her, then at me. See, this is what I meant. You have filled these children with resentment. I stood too. No, you brought an invoice to Thanksgiving. I walked to my office and returned carrying the gray storage box. It was not a legal binder. No courtroom, no threats. Just 9 years of family history nobody had wanted to name. I set it beside the list. You brought what you need, I said. I brought what you gave. I opened the box, the cream letter first. I read the line about Ethan being unsuitable and Sophie being someone else's responsibility. Allison looked down. Mom said that had been written in anger. I placed the returned wedding photograph beside it. Then, the Christmas package label. The ultrasound photo. Caleb's birth announcement. Sophie's middle school graduation invitation. The screenshot claiming we had refused Allison's wedding. The guest list proving we had never been invited. Then the group chat from after the acquisition. I read Allison's sentence about making the requests sound like family needs rather than demands. Her face went red. I read Mom's sentence. Lauren has always wanted approval more than she admits. If we frame this as finally bringing her back into the family, she will help. Dad closed his eyes. Carmen whispered, "Oh, Deborah." Mom did not cry. She became angry. Those conversations were private. So were 9 years of my grief. You have been collecting evidence against your own mother? I was collecting proof for myself because every time I questioned what happened, someone told me I was dramatic. Allison said, "Nobody is asking you to forget the past." I looked at her. Your first text in 9 years said life is too short for old hurt, and then you asked about money through Mom 2 days later. I have a daughter to think about. So do I. I put my hand on Sophie's shoulder. You had a niece to think about too. Madison looked at her mother. You told me Aunt Lauren wanted nothing to do with us. Allison's face froze. Madison, not now. Did she? It was complicated. I answered. I sent cards for years. Madison stared at the returned envelopes. Allison said I was turning her daughter against her. The pattern was so familiar I almost felt bored. Deborah grabbed the financial list. Fine. If you want to punish everyone forever, say that. I do not want to punish you. Then help your father. Dad finally spoke. Stop using me. The room went silent. Deborah turned toward him. What? I do not want Lauren's money. Martin, your knee surgery? Medicare and my supplemental plan cover most of it. We can sell the lake timeshare. We can refinance the remaining mortgage or move. Mom stared as if he had changed languages. He looked at me. I came here to apologize, not to collect. That was the moment her plan collapsed. Not when I produced the box. When the quiet man who had protected her story for decades stepped out of it, Deborah called him weak. Allison began crying. Carter stared at the table. Madison moved her chair slightly away from her mother. I folded the list once and handed it back to Deborah. Here is my answer. No mortgage payoff, no studio bailout, no wedding balance, no monthly allowance, no college fund for a teenager who has 2 parents and has never been allowed to know me. If Madison wants to delete a relationship with us someday, it will not depend on money. Mom whispered. After everything we did for you. I looked at the returned envelopes. Name one thing from the last 9 years. She could not. I am not refusing because I hate you, I said. I am refusing because money cannot be the first successful relationship we have. Deborah said, I am your mother. Then act like one without being paid. Her face went pale. That was the sentence. The room remained silent long enough for the refrigerator motor to click on. Then Mom picked up her purse and told Allison they were leaving. At the front door she turned toward me. When your children abandon you, remember this. Sophie answered before I could. She never made me earn being her daughter. Deborah looked at Sophie, And for once, there was nothing left to say. She walked out. Allison followed. Carter and Madison stayed for another 10 minutes, because Madison wanted Dad's phone number and, quietly, mine. Nobody made a speech about healing. We ate cold pie after they left. The weeks after Thanksgiving were quieter than I expected. Dad called every Sunday, not to ask for anything, but to tell me small things. The weather in Lexington, the knee surgery date, what he had cooked for dinner. He sold the lake timeshare himself. He and Mom moved to a smaller townhouse the following spring. He never once asked me to cover the difference. That mattered. Madison began texting Sophie about college, then me about internships. I answered carefully. She had been raised inside the same story I had escaped, and I refused to punish a teenager for believing the adults who raised her. Allison contacted me twice. The first message said I had humiliated her. The second asked whether I would reconsider helping with Madison's tuition. I answered neither. Deborah sent one letter 6 months later. It contained 12 paragraphs about her childhood, her fears, the sacrifices she believed she had made, and one sentence that said, "I am sorry you felt rejected." I read it once and put it in the storage box. An apology that refuses to name the action is still a defense. Dad eventually visited again. This time he came alone and slept at a hotel because he said access to my home was something he wanted to earn, not assume. He attended Caleb's soccer game, let Sophie decide whether she wanted to call him Grandpa, and left before dinner when he sensed the day had been enough. That restraint did more to rebuild trust than any dramatic speech could have. Deborah has never met Caleb in person. She has not seen Sophie since that porch. I do not celebrate that. Estrangement is not a trophy. It is sometimes the cost of refusing to keep bleeding into a relationship that only becomes warm when you are useful. Ethan and I still work too much. The acquisition did not turn us into different people. We still argue about grocery lists, forget laundry in the washer, and eat takeout at the kitchen island after late meetings. The money gave us security, but it did not create the family my mother suddenly wanted access to. That family had been built long before anyone knew its value. In a tiny apartment, in Sophie's purple crayon, in Carmen's soup, in Ethan asking whether I wanted him to sit beside me instead of telling me how to feel. I used to think self-worth meant becoming successful enough that the people who rejected you finally regretted it. I was wrong. Self-worth is reaching the point where their regret no longer decides what door you open. I did not win because my mother went home without a check. I won because I stopped confusing reconciliation with access, blood with loyalty, and financial generosity with proof of love. So tell me honestly, if a parent erased you and your children for nearly a decade, then returned only after your family became wealthy and arrived with a list of bills, would a sincere apology ever be enough to let them fully back in, or would some doors stay closed no matter how much time had passed?